Good day, sir. How are you?
Whew, just running through the Zoom gauntlet.
Before I've been in radio 40 years. Before COVID, no one was doing Zoom. Everyone was just phoners this, phoner, and I'm on a YouTube channel and I'm going, I can't do phoners, and I've got to put all this BG and pictures up, and people can't see them. But once that's the only good thing. But then COVID, everyone gets on Zoom. They're all bored, silly. They want to talk to someone. They want to see someone's face. There you
Right.
go.
You look like Robert Downey Jr. I mean, I know you've probably heard that before, but I feel like that's who I'm talking to.
Not so much anymore. I'm 63 now, so back in the early days, I had this before he did. So that's all I have to say.
Right.
By the
Right.
way, in the 90s, I dated a gal, Suzanne. She was freaking madly in love with you. She like I swear to God, Black Hawk was like that was her thing, man.
Right.
And then back then I wasn't into country music. She got me into it.
Right.
She'd go, "This is how it's done, man." So just thought I'd share that with you, Suzanne, wherever you are.
Come
Talking to
back.
the guy, talking to the guy right now. That's all I'm saying. Hey, man, you're a doer. You're like I heard you in an interview say, if you want something done, ask a busy guy. I mean, I married someone like that. Let me start with that. How far back does that? I mean, all these bands, and I know your history, man, but
Hmm.
when did you have that software? Did you have to learn that software? Were you born with it? Both? Nurture nature?
Hmm. Well, I come from a family of doers. My grandfather was a large land owner, holder, and very successful farmer. And he was, as a young boy, my idol. Our name resonated in the small community because of the number of acres we owned and the money that it meant. And so at a very early age, I assimilated a sense of not entitlement so much as just pride. And so I carried that with me. I didn't farm. I was the first male in my family not to farm. But I kind of carried that work ethic with me. And I would say probably somewhere just after high school, I remember I was really good at organizing things, whatever it was, a fraternity. If I wanted to be in a fraternity in junior college and I didn't want to go through the indignity of joining someone else's, I started my own. And when I did, I hauled out some Greek letters. I researched some charters. I made up some bogus whatever rules, and I laid a name on it, and everybody came to my fraternity and joined my fraternity. So I know it sounds a little frat radish and a little bit counter to the rock and roll lifestyle, but I was probably 19 years old, and it occurred to me that I could organize and create. And I had this uh, view of something before it became a reality. I could see it. And so I put my first band together and we were good. And it kind of echoed the junior college experience, which let me just say, I am not a scholastic character. I have a fairly decent IQ and I have a lot of social IQ, but I'm not, you know what I mean? I'm not the book guy. Uh, as a matter of fact, once I got through the weeds with the Vietnamese War, I was out of school and on to my musical career. But that was sort of the model for organizing something that would be legitimate and really successful. And so my first band was really well put together and it morphed into the Outlaws, which was a success. I left the Outlaws, started the Henry Paul band. It was a success. I left rejoined the Outlaws, had a really good run through the 80s during the darker part of the band's career, but we had a great run. And I left again and put Black Hawk together with Dave and Van and had significant success. And so I was just gifted from the standpoint of organizational skills, a vision of what it could or should be, and the work ethic to make it, to stick with it and make it happen.
How did your friends and family react to, you become larger than life?
Well, I think I could use my father my mother was always supportive. You know how mothers are. They're very supportive and very nurturing. And my mother encouraged me to pursue my dream. But my dad was dubious. And when we finally did make something of ourselves from the standpoint of notoriety or, recognition and acceptance, he was at the head of the line to, pat me on the back. And he wanted that for me, I think, like most dads do. He didn't want to see me go through the rock and roll gauntlet and come out the other end empty-handed. But, anytime you succeed, people love you. And anytime you fail, they walk away. So I was gifted with 3 different careers, all 3 of which found significant success. But I will tell you that the results of what that represents is far different than the imagined perception. It's just significantly different. You're in it every day, working. Sometimes as a younger man, you might rub up against the edge, the edge of demise. And you might pull back like I did. Some of my friends in the band did not pull back. They kind of got up to the edge and just flirted with it to the point where it caught them napping. But I always knew that line. I always knew to stay a step or 2 back on this side because I didn't want to die, and I never bought into the rock and roll mantra of live hard, die young. That never resonated with me on any level.
Everyone that I'm interviewing, they've at least got 10 years on me, usually.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is always, you just answered it. Why are you still here? And the other people, I've never heard it said so eloquently the way that you say, yeah, you're on. There's a line there. You're close to the edge. Some people can't see it. Well, they can't see it because they're so intoxicated. They don't even think there's a line.
Yeah. And I was watching the Leonard Skynyrd movie, and I know there's been 2 or 3 of them made, but it was the one that the guy from Nashville made, the CMT guy, and it was sad to me. It was really sad how hard they put themselves in positions of ultimate abuse, and it just was sad to me because they were such gifted people as songwriters and players. And they're not the only band, but they're a band that I do know, and I've seen it in other bands. Molly Hatchet is a good example, but where you would drink the Kool-Aid, the live hard, die young Kool-Aid, and you would, rock and roll, destructive, Keith Moon, I mean, to me, Bob Seger is a wise man. To me, he is a wise man. Paul McCartney is a wise man. And I'm using household names as examples, but there's a number of people that have a career, really enjoy it, get to live out their dream, but they don't have to sacrifice themselves in the process.
How'd you maintain being keeping your head together and not letting it get to your head? Because I always say, if I'd be Justin Bieber, I'd be dead. I would have died. I mean, that couldn't have survived that.
Well, there's a few parts to that puzzle. One is seeing it for what it is. There were First of all, there was a lot of money being spent by a major label to promote your musical career. Number one. Number two, there were people that got really handsome salaries to go to radio and make sure that you got played. So I never was fooled by the notion that it was about me. I knew it wasn't about me. I knew that I was part of the equation, but it was just really a small part to the equation. I mean, if you ever sat in an office with Ahmet Ertegun and had to run your album down track by track and listen to his thoughts on things, it became clear that you were part of the equation. And he dealt with Stephen Stills and, Robert Plant and, Jimmy Page. He dealt with these, Aretha, dealt with them every day as people. And I learned from Clive, who was a little self-absorbed, but really grounded. And I learned from Ahmet, that it was a team effort. Charlie Daniels taught me a lot about taking control of your group and representing it accurately and not leaving that job to someone who really wasn't qualified. Could be the drummer, could be the bass player, could be the lead guitar player, but somebody in the band had to represent the group. And if you wanted the group represented correctly, you damn sure wanted to make sure you did it yourself. So if I went to radio with Charlie to promote a show featuring the Henry Paul Band and Charlie Daniels Band, and I sat there and watched him dispense with respect and affection towards these people, I learned just by watching that was definitely an acumen that I could relate to and buy into. And secondly, it's a lot of perception. I mean, we're just people like everyone else. We just make records, we write songs and record them. We go out on a stage and we talk to people. Honestly, you tell people, if you're me, you're standing up there, you tell people what it is that I want to hear, not what I think they want to hear. It's what I want to hear. I want to hear someone talk to me the way that I want to be talked to. I don't want to, there's so much pandering and so much showbizy horseshit that goes into the rapport. If you listen to James Taylor on stage, it's like the high altar of complete, like, phenomenal relationship with fans. James Taylor is it for me. He's wonderful that way. Don Henley is a little preachy here and there, maybe, or a little bit, distant. But man, does he have something to say? And I don't know. I just kind of go for the best that I can find and try and emulate them and learn from them and just try and be in that community. I found Greg Allman's book very disappointing, his language and his assessment of other people. And it just was not very entertaining. And I don't think it did him really a whole lot of good, because Greg was a brilliant songwriter, and just one of the great singers of our time. He's a smart guy. I don't know why he felt like he had to criticize other people or use, profanity, and it just seemed, it was disappointing when and there's others that aren't. I mean, if you ever read Bob Dylan's book Chronicles, I mean, it reads like a Tom Wolfe novel. I mean, I could not believe how well it was written. So I'm in the middle of an autobiography, and I'm trying really hard to make it. I have an enormous aptitude for detail. I remember everything, and I'm just going through it this year and putting it all down, and it's incredibly detailed. And I think fans of the Southern rock genre, which I was a part of, will be very entertained by the behind the scenes recollections that I have.
When's the timeline for that?
Well, I'll be done with it this year. I'm up to chapter 5 right now, so I've probably got anywhere between 60 and 75 pages written. The book will probably come in at about 300 pages, maybe a little bit more with photographs. And I'm using some song lyrics as a counterpoint to the story, just to see how life or art imitates life. And it's going to be really, really good. There's a friend of mine in New York, a guy by the name of Gary Hertz. Gary was my product manager at Arista, and he was a fan. And when I was at Arista, Nashville, after I left Arista, New York, he and I became really close. He was a guy in my corner. He would write my bios and everything. And he's a great editor. And so I dictate this book to him, and he goes, puts it on paper, translates it, shapes it, sends it back to me. And man, it's just, he's phenomenal. And my recollection is super detailed.
So I find it interesting because, of course, doing what I do, I talk to a lot of people who have just written their books, and they use words like it's cathartic, but it's arduous, and it's But a lot of the times I get this too because I'm doing a thing myself, and I'll go, pretty good life, man. You're learning things about yourself, and
well, yes, and if you look at a motion picture and look how much time is spent shooting a film and what you wind up with in the way of a movie, it's kind of like that. You can put a year into this and wind up with a book that you can read in a day and a half or 2 days, so but yeah, it's your one chance to tell the story, literally tell the story in a truthful form and fashion, not knock people down. Yeah, we didn't always see eye to eye in the band, but I loved my bandmates. We were dreaming big and making things come true, and I never got to a point with any one of those people where I didn't like them. And so, you can tell that story without being critical. And I'm just happy that we did what we did. I am, to this day, pleasantly surprised that we did succeed. And when you do that with someone, God, it's like this lifelong bond of accomplishment, and dreams are important, and if you can make them come true with someone, they become very important.
I was this morning and last night listening to Green Grass and High Tides on Spotify, and my wife, who's 11 years younger than me, I look like a boot. She looks like she's ready to go and get ID to the liquor store. She's never heard it before. And she stops, and she's always a barometer, because before I like to do my research really late, so it's fresh in my mind, because my notes are right here if you see me looking over here. She's, what is that? And I told her, and she says, that's heavenly. That's just 35 million streams on Spotify. What a way to kick it off.
Right. Well, and it's a very majestic story, written for Brian Jones, written for Janis Joplin, written for Jimi Hendrix. Very majestic lyric, and the musicianship is just, I would have to say, unequaled. Stylistically, it is specifically its own sort of thing. But man, what a thing that was! What a moment that was! And that story of how that song became what it became is an interesting story in and of itself. It started out as a 3.5-minute ballad, and it wound up being an AOR rock staple. And the lead guitar players in the band were at their best in that moment, and the band that played along with them were in that moment at their best. It's kind of like when you see Liz Taylor, maybe in Butterfield 8, or maybe, one of those movies where she's maybe Giant, where she's at her peak. And we all have that moment, and you lead up to it, you have it, and then you come off of it and you step back and let someone else come and have their moment. But that was our moment, and it was brilliant. It was a brilliant light of creativity and musicianship.
You contributed handsomely, let's say, on that album. There's one of my favorite song, In the Breeze. I that's one of those songs that stayed with me for a lot of years. I remember that album. I remember that first album. I remember looking at it and thinking, this is a perfect record. This is just 75 was an interesting time, because back then Top 40 radio, and I was wanting to get into radio even back then, played everything. You'd get R&B, you'd get not too much disco, but dance. You get the country rock stuff, you get the pop stuff, you get the glam stuff, it was an interesting time to come in.
hmm And it was, a very specifically stylistic and territorial. You wouldn't be Henry, and I don't use my, I don't refer to myself in third person to make a point, but you can't be me and buy very far into Ziggy Stardust. You can't. It, if you're me, you buy into Richie Furay or you buy into Stephen Stills. You don't buy into Ziggy. Stephen is your musical compass. And once you develop a love of music and a style of your own through other people, it pretty much never leaves. You start out and you end on a similar page. Henley took it to a really cool place, especially in the 80s. Boys of Summer was freaking ridiculous. But, I mean, aside from that, The Last Resort and all these songs that he wrote that were so spectacular in their theme and their musical personality. You just, there was guys like the Bee Gees, there were guys like Wild Cherry, then there was, I was of the Bob Seger school, and the Glenn Fry and Don Henley school, and the Stephen Stills and David Crosby and Roger McGuinn. And those were the people that really inspired me.
Song of the Breeze. What tell me about that song?
That, it's a very complex chord progression. I can't to this day believe I wrote it by myself. I don't know where it came from, but man, it hits that chorus and it's so uplifting.
Yeah.
It's such an odd arrangement. We were never like, hey, verse, chorus, solo, bridge, chorus. It was like verse, chorus, solo, verse, chorus, over. And it was weird the way it was structured. But man, there was a commercial, musical, attractive part to that song melodically. And my voice was, I think, probably really in a great place for that song. Back when I was young in those days, I didn't know about capos and trying to find keys to sing in. I wrote a song and I just sang it in the key that I wrote it in because, Black Hawk was different. We would move things around and find that ultimate place to sing a song, but not with the Outlaws in the early days. It was just, you'd write a song and if you were lucky, it sounded good. Song and the Breeze was kind of like that. Just got lucky. I don't even know what it's about, most of what we wrote about back then was separation anxiety from our loved ones, because we were gone so much.
Mm-hmm.
There's a song in the breeze here, it's singing through the trees as it blows along. You will know the tune. Time can heal, so I've been told. If you believe it, you'll behold all the time we need together is coming soon. Well, we're not together. We're apart doing this, and you're at home doing that. Everything was about that separation.
Knoxville Girl, was that about someone specific?
No, Knoxville Girl was a traditional bluegrass ballad. It was a dirgy kind of dark song about a guy that killed his girlfriend. And I took the song and I wrote new verses to it. And I wrote that intro segment, that really nice down thing where it slams into the bluegrass section. And it was, bluegrass is a great kind of musical trick. It just translates in a happy place on stage in front of people. They love the tempo and they love the musical personality of it. And so Knoxville Girl was me taking a song that had been around for literally 100 years and rewriting it and changing the musical personality of it. And because it was public domain, it became my song. And it was an enormous part to the band's musical personality, and it was a great part of the show. It, underscored the country rock character of the band.
I talked about just talked to Graham Goebel for I think the fifth time of Little River Band, and we talk about harmonies, and he mentions the people you mentioned when it comes to, because a lot of the people you mentioned are famous for harmonies, but you guys, and in the '90s with that little country band, that was amazing. Harmonies would see you guys with Black Hawk. I think you formed something that someone who wouldn't like country music would like country music. I mentioned that on the radio a lot. I'm on radio in Vancouver, and there's just certain songs that even if you don't like the band or the genre, uh, you were everything you touch has like amazing harmonies.
Well, and we didn't do it by design. We did it because it was who we were. We had no interest, nor did we write anything about anything country lifestyle driven. That was the kiss of death. We wrote about let them whirl, let your children just be who they're going to be. We'll take care of things, and we kind of held ourselves to the Fogelberg or the Henley school of lyrical impression. We weren't pickup truck driving, beer drinking,
Dog dying.
Yeah, we just weren't those people. Dan Stevenson was an amazing songwriter, and he and I were in many ways very close because of our life experiences and age. And it was one of the most artistically rewarding experiences I've ever had as a professional recording artist, was working with Van and Dave, who I still work with. Dave was an exceptional talent, and it wasn't crazy. It wasn't that rock and roll, head banging crazy bull hockey. It was, let's make a great record on this great song and put on a great show. I had a wealth of experience as a live musical personality. They did not. They hadn't done really all that much out there. They had a whole lot of success as songwriters and producers. So the relationship was really, really good for all of us. They learned how to become entertainers, and I learned how to make records better.
Why'd you leave the Outlaws the first time?
I was voted off the island. Huey and Billy wanted to, I think they had read the reviews and decided the band was about them, and they didn't need me as a band leader and as a frontman for the group because it was not about me, that they had outgrown me, I think was the theme. And it was a surprise to me at the time. It was a very, very hurtful thing, something that'll stay with me for the rest of my life. But the way that I handled it, I think, was ultimately the test of character, which was to go out and put a new group together and get another major label deal and go back on the road and do what I wanted to do, and kind of dare them to put me on the bill, because we would,
Success is the best revenge, man.
Well, it was the Outlaws, to be quite candid, were in a certain sort of way, after Hurry Sundown, they sort of, after I left the band, they kind of floundered. They did have ghostwriters, but the band had lost its musical identity. Those first 2 or 3 records were very focused and very cohesive, and then it just got to be something different. I rejoined the band some years later in 1983, and Huey and I put a new group together and went on the road in the 80s. We cut Soldiers of Fortune in 1985. But Southern rock had fallen from grace from the standpoint of popularity. There was no way you were going to renovate the genre. For some reason, in the late 90s, it kind of came back and became popular. Maybe it was the advent of Leonard Skynyrd getting back together and the Allman Brothers. But suddenly the Outlaws were back in style again. And the fans that loved us in the 70s and early 80s, came out of the woodwork to support us. So I'm thankful for that.
But if I remember correctly, Billy was asked to leave the island as well, wasn't he? Because of his lifestyle.
Yeah,
Later,
yeah, I think it was a different reason. And I wasn't there, but I know enough about everyone to know that the drinking thing, was definitely a booby trap, and it caught up to a lot of us, and I think it became so immensely problematic for Billy that he could no longer live with it. I think it was a catalyst in his demise.
Clive Davis. I'm doing a video. I've got a few people, and as you can imagine, with Clive, I'm getting a lot of different reactions. To
But
you, Clive Davis was
well, he was our biggest supporter, our most powerful and influential supporter. And Clive comes off like he's in it for Clive. But Clive fancies himself as a musical guy and he likes to be involved. And not unlike Ahmet Ertegun, he has, I think, a personal stake in a lot of his artists' careers. I think it's an extension of his musical taste. And if he signs somebody, he wants to see him succeed because it reflects positively on him. All I can say about Clive Davis is I've had two different record deals with Arista Records, and both of those careers were enormously successful. And if you're the captain of the ship, you get the lion's share of the credit. So I was proud that I personally made his book, that I was the only one from the Outlaws or from Black Hawk that made his book. I think that Clive and I think he saw me for what I was, a really tenacious kind of guy and a survivor. And I had hits early in the label's career and much later in the label's career. And he found that to be unique and felt for some reason comfortable using me as an example. But he was an enormous personality in the record business. And anytime you become that well known, you're going to attract supporters and detractors. And
yeah.
I think his track record at CBS, at Arista, I think it kind of speaks for itself. And you don't have to like him, but you have to definitely. And by like him, you don't have to admire him, but you definitely have to acknowledge what it was he did.
Opening for the Stones. I saw that interview. Said Keith was a mess. First time. I think that the first time the first time you actually you went backstage and he had the things in his hair and.
My first encounter with those guys was at Hampton Roads Coliseum in Norfolk or Hampton, Virginia. We got a last minute addition on the bill and we opened the show, and Mick came to our dressing room with Keith after our show, and they were very diplomatic and very complimentary, and as you would kind of expect them to be. But I played on a number of shows with the Rolling Stones, primarily because of my relationship with people that controlled that. And that's how you got on those bills, was through Bill Graham and Michael Kleffner, who was the national promotional director for Arista, was the head of security at the Fillmore East. Well, that's convenient. Bill and he were like best of friends. And if Michael said, put the Outlaws on the Rolling Stones show, you won't regret it. They're a great band. And he puts them on and the Outlaws perform. And then we continued to get the call. I got the call through the Henry Paul band, through the Outlaws. And always had, you know, a very successful and memorable sort of contribution to the show.
You're listening to them at one point. One of my ex-bosses, he's talking to Charlie Daniels. You know, I'm listening to them, I'm doing work while all these interviews are going on because they're in the background. Then Charlie Daniels gets on and he's talking, speaking to interesting people. He's talking to Len, my first boss, who hired me in '83. And I had to stop what I was doing and really listen. And I've never been the biggest Charlie Daniels fan, but it's my business to know what he did. So, and I'm listening to him and it's almost like the world disappeared. And Charlie is talking to Len Tucson, and they're the only two people who exist. And I've never heard someone be so respectful to someone interviewing him, which is what my friend told me about you too. But I just had to, I was going, man. And I know he took a hat off his head and gave it to you, right? Charlie Daniels?
He did early on when we first met Charlie, and Charlie gave me his hat, which was like receiving the key to New York City. You know, it was like the greatest honor. And man, I just wore it, and you could sort of feel things starting to come together. And Charlie Daniels gave me his hat, and you know, you were becoming a member of this very exclusive club. And it was pretty unreal. I mean, it was for all of the sacrifice that came with the effort to try and get where we got. There were moments where the arrival was every bit as glorious as you ever dreamed it would be, and getting that hat from him was one of those moments. Toy Caldwell gave me a Western single action 6-shot 357 Magnum revolver. Wow. The revolver was given to Toy by Hank Jr. So Hank gave it to Toy. Toy gave it to me. Well, now we're getting somewhere.
And Pat Simmons gave you one too, right?
He gave me a 335 backstage at Madison Square Garden. I mean, I just gave that guitar to my son. I went through my guitar collection and just unloaded everything onto my oldest son, because I've already done I'm done. You know, I'm not finished with what I'm doing, but I'm no longer accumulating things. Now I'm starting to put them in places I think they need to be.
You're purging.
Well,
is that the word? Is that too strong a word?
I'm not saying I'm done, but I mean, you know, there's a difference when you're trying to become somebody, and there's a significant difference when you finally realize that you have become who it is you are. And I'm at the place where I finally became who I am. And when you become who it is you are, instead of trying to become who it is you dream of being, you can let go of a few things. You know, I had a really nice home recording setup, you know, and it occurred to me, do I really want to continue writing songs, just continue to beat my head up against the wall and write these songs and do this and do this and do this? Or do I want to give that to my son and let him try and create a musical personality for himself? Because I would love to do this. I have this book that I want to finish and get out there, and I have maybe a solo record to record that has nothing to do with either the Outlaws or Black Hawk or the Henry Paul Band. But other than that, I'm good. I mean, Dixie Highway was really well written and recorded, and It's About Pride was a wonderful, really important record for the Outlaws. So I feel like I've proven my point. I don't have anything really left to prove. And if this book lends any insight into fans as a peek behind the curtain of a musical genre that was enormously important to them, I will feel like I have succeeded in that. And, you know, you can't realize these things until you've arrived. You know, I would say, and I say this with all candid, uh, unguarded, uh, truthfulness. Writing Dixie Highway, which was our second studio record under my leadership of the band from 2008 forward, was very, very important to me because it would ultimately be a record by which I personally would be judged. The songs, the character of the songs, the musicianship, the arrangements. The studio record before that, It's About Pride, was another record that was very important. It was the first record the band had released in a long, long, long time.
And it did well,
And
right?
yeah, that came out in 2012. And once I put that out there, we had our own ship to sail.
Yeah.
Before that, we were riding in somebody else's boat. But after It's About Pride, we had our own ship to sail. We had a wealth of really good songs that we put in the show. And then with Dixie Highway, it was like, well, Hank, you've proven your point. You were a creative catalyst of good for the Outlaws. And these two records bear out that assertion, that these two albums definitely state the importance you had in the original group, and the fact that you were able to continue on at a late date in your life and still write and record good songs and make good records on them. And that was important to me, not only to put a great band out there to play Greengrass and High Tides, but to play these other songs and do it on a very professional level.
Full circle, it's amazing how things. I mean, I'm sure if someone would you have believed someone when you were that first exit from the Outlaws, if someone would have whispered in your ear and told you that what you just said was going to happen, would you have believed them?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Because, for me, if you never give up, you never lose. And there was never, ever a moment where I ever even considered giving up on anything. And so for me, it was just a matter of time until the musical chairs got back around till it was for me to sit down. It was just a matter of time. And I don't say that arrogantly. I just know that I was going to be in it until I had it. I wasn't going to stop until I had a moment to prove myself within the context of my first love and my first musical impression on a professional level. I wanted closure on that. And I got it. And I remember I was sued in federal court for trademark violations by the widow of my musical partner, Huey Thomason. And I remember how it felt when I received those papers in the mail at the late date in my career. And I was thinking, really? Is this how this is going to end at the end of this long 40+ year career? And the answer was no, that was not how it was going to end. That I had the right to do what I was doing, and I had the commitment and vision and work ethic to make sure it was done right. And whoever was on the other side of the ball in that confrontational moment was nowhere to be found when we were scrapping for a career that we dreamed of as young men. So if you weren't in the band in 1973, then you didn't have a say in how the band was going to manifest itself in 2009.
Mm-hmm.
So Monty and I prevailed, and we were able to not only do what we wanted to do with the band, but we were able to put the band back in a very positive musical light. And I know for a fact, had it gone the other way, it wouldn't have happened that way. It wouldn't have been that. It would have been drugged through the mud, and that wasn't going to happen. There was no way it was going to happen because we were right. Monty and I were original members of the band. We had every right to pursue the band's musical future based on our control. And yeah, we love Huey. We're sorry he's gone. We love Billy. We're sorry he's gone. We love Frank. They're gone. we're going to do what we're going to do. And we did well by that. I think we made very good, uh, I think we did really right by the opportunity we were given for the Outlaws and for the Outlaws fans, and still do.
Circle back to 77. When I was 17, that Skynyrd accident happened. And I remember really getting into them at that time before it happened. And being 17 and never having a loss, it was weird for me, because everyone remembers their first loss, the grandma or whoever it is, or your hero, or like I remember when Freddie Prinze died in the 70s. I remember going, what? I love Chico and the Man. What? That's crazy. How could he be dead? He can't be dead. It's that weird abstract feeling that human beings sometimes have when it comes to death, because it's so big, it's almost unfathomable. But going back to that conversation you had with that bus driver, Ronnie Van Zant in the front seat. Ronnie was, who was Ronnie to you?
He was, I wasn't in Lynyrd Skynyrd, so I didn't have to deal with Ronnie on a level that those guys had to, which was completely different. But as a band leader for the Outlaws, dealing with the band leader from Lynyrd Skynyrd at that time, that was my job. And he and I had mutual sort of roles in one another's groups. And Ronnie he always had a larger agenda other than what was in front of him or what you saw. It could have been country music, his love for country music, and his wanting to become a part of that as a musical personality, or he wanted to put his band on a pedestal with the sociological backdrop of the modern New South as his guide, as a moral human being, dispensing with all of the unfortunate pitfalls that came with being a Southern-minded man. Racism, self-entitlement, just all of the dark little corners that history holds onto. He always wanted to shed those. He wanted to shed them, and he was a very principled person with regard to race and with regard to musical issues as they applied to different people. He held himself to a very high standard. He talked about things that were not just in the moment, chart positions. He was very acutely aware of those, and he was incredibly competitive, but he was also he had a much bigger a dog in any fight than what you saw. He was always much more, he had his mind on other things than just living in that moment.
You had said that he had some Jimmy Rogers in him. Hey, he had a Jimmy Rogers.
Huge. Yeah. I mean, Call Me the Breeze, his cover of the J.J. Cale song, he and I had one thing very, very closely in common. We were both enormous Merle Haggard fans. He wanted to make a country record. He wanted to, I think through his childhood and his dad, he was a rock and roll snot, and went out and did really well with his band as a countercultural sort of character in a rock and roll sort of tried and true method. But he was also very steeped in his love of fishing and his love of people and his racially unbiased view of music. And I mean, he would put people like the musicians at the Muscle Shoals Sound Studio on a pedestal in a song because he wanted to educate people the same way that Merle Haggard put Bob Wills on a pedestal and brought Bob Wills back to, he wanted people to know about these people that played on all these records over in Muscle Shoals. He wanted them to know that, and he was highly respectful. So he was very principled in a lot of different ways that didn't always show itself but he was a very complex character and coming from a very, middle class at best background. I think his dad was a truck driver. So Ronnie grew up in a very modest income home. It wasn't, he was a very principled guy in a lot of really important areas. And I go back to what I said, race. He didn't buy into any of that bull crap.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from the South, he was free and fair and encouraging. He was also, a tough guy and intimidating, and ran his band pretty much, in a unique form. But, whatever it was, it worked great. And when you'd see him on stage, you always had to give him a tip of the hat because he did a pretty damn good job.
Did you know Stephen Cassie Gaines well?
I'm sorry, Steve Gaines?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I mean, Steve was a brilliant light. I heard Steve's not Muscle Shoals, his Macon demo sessions. They were floating around for a while. Even as he joined Lynyrd Skynyrd, he had cut these demos, and I believe it was Macon, but they were just like crazy good. His playing, his songs, his singing. But when Ed King left, I think Ronnie knew that he needed a songwriting partner, so to speak, someone to give the band the kind of life it had early on with Ed. Ed brought a very significantly important voice to Lynyrd Skynyrd as a songwriter and as a player. Let me go on record and say that Gary Rossington's was a great guitar player and tried and true core member of that group. I mean, I think to me, when you say Lynyrd Skynyrd, you think Gary Rossington, Alan Collins, and Ronnie Van Zant. Those three people.
Before we leave Lynyrd Skynyrd, how did you handle that plane crash? How did you digest that?
Like you. Couldn't believe it. I mean, death was new to me then. It was brand new. I had lost my granddad, but I mean, come on. I mean, it was my granddad. This was one of my friends, or one of my peer group, one of my coworkers. And one day he gets on a plane and doesn't come back. And it was just like, wow, it blew my mind. I couldn't believe it. It was devastatingly sad and unbelievably steeped in loss.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the Outlaws in a lot of ways owe their career to Ronnie because of the way he promoted our group early on. And so that in and of itself put him in a unique place in my life. But losing him I wrote one of my very best songs as a tribute to him. One of my very best songs, myself and Barry Rapp wrote a song called Gray Ghost. And to this day, it's one of the great songs lyrically and of course musically. But the analogy to compare Ronnie Van Zant to a Confederate cavalry officer who had a nickname called the Gray Ghost because he was hard to find. He was elusive. And because of the loss of Ronnie and the connotation the word ghost has as a spirit that remains thereafter, the metaphor in the title alone was worth the price of admission. And then the lyrics were very self-effacing. I mean, it's like the fast life and the music is just a grim disguise for the heartache and the fear of growing old. Without the ones that mean the most, it makes you realize that you're the one that's left out in the cold. That's some good stuff.
Yeah. That's top shelf, man.
And it's coming from a person who's trying to be somebody and lost someone who was somebody. And it was just amazingly insightful, and the story is steeped in reality. The autumn wind whispers through the tall and lonely pines as the hour of fate is drawing close at hand. A free bird falling from the sky brings a bitter end to another southern man. I mean, it's just like I'm comparing it lyrically, and a lot of what I write lyrically to, it's just real. And it's a story told in detail that's true, factually, and it happens to rhyme. And so, it's just that inspired me to write Gray Ghost with Barry Rapp. And it's to this day, it's a pillar piece of music for me in my career in the Outlaws. People love the song. It probably gets as big a reaction in the course of an evening as Greengrass and High Tide. So, it's a great tribute to a guy that was enormously influential in the dream coming true in your life. And that's what he was to me.
Speaking of really great songs, I defy anyone to be in a room and hear Goodbye Says It All and not stop what they're doing and turn around. 25 million it listens on Spotify. That's just one of those, I remember where I was when I first heard it songs. I mean,
unreal.
Drop the mic, baby.
There isn't a wasted word in the freaking song. And everything is so smart. You said something earlier. Black Hawk was one of those country bands for people that didn't like country music, because it really wasn't country music. It was more like the Eagles than it was Alabama. I mean, Alabama enjoyed incredible success, but they wrote things and sang about things that we didn't mean anything to us. It did to them, but not to us.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, Goodbye Says It All is a brilliant song. And the record we cut on it was slinky, in the pocket, just undeniable. Launched our career and went on to, sell almost we're approaching our triple platinum status on that first album. And I mean, to come from a band like the Outlaws that had gold records to getting platinum albums late in your life, it was like a gift that you couldn't believe showed up in the mail. It was, and you worked hard for it. If you were me, you worked very hard for that opportunity, but you could, in your wildest dreams, would never have expected it to do what it did. And I remember hearing this song on the radio for the first time, and I was just beside myself with joy.
When was the first time you heard yourself on the radio?
Well, it would have been with the Outlaws.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been probably on our tour bus with the FM radio on, because back in the 70s, mid 70s, you had a stereo system. I don't know, a cassette deck probably. You couldn't play vinyl, but we listened to rock radio because we were on it. And I think we were cruising up the New Jersey Turnpike, and we were on tour with the Doobie Brothers. I think we were going to Roosevelt Field to play with the Doobie Brothers and what was that California country rock band from Berkeley? New Riders of the Purple Sage. It's all up here. and we had the radio on where it's like 9, 10 in the morning. We're drinking a beer and cruising up the turnpike and the tour bus. Man, we're on a tour bus. And Greengrass and High Tides comes on the radio, and we're like, whoa, check us out. After a while, it becomes a way of life, but early on, like I said, with Goodbye Says It All, you never get over the first time you hear it. And I remember being in the bus with the FM radio on in the front lounge, drinking beer at 10 in the morning, listening to Greengrass and going, holy shit, we finally are getting somewhere. So we were a long way from home, and people showed up to see the band. You know, it was like, we couldn't believe people were coming to see the band. Had no idea that through label promotion and marketing and all these other tricky little characteristics, you know, that you would put a show on sale and people would actually come out and see it in big numbers. And we were like flabbergasted. We couldn't believe it.
Doobie Brothers. I always look at Patrick Simmons, big fan. Mm-hmm. And it's strange when Michael came into the band and Tom left. Mm-hmm. And I remember running to go get Tom's solo album when it came out, which sounded like the Doobie Brothers, and I liked it. But I remember my friends were going, oh my God, what's going on? What have they done with taking it to the streets? And I remember thinking, it was a far cry from Stampede that came before, but I remember thinking, yeah, but Pat's still there. And still, to me, I don't know, it's still the Doobie Brothers to me. Patrick Simmons, to me, was always the glue in this band. And what a guitarist, you know.
And what a sweetheart, you know. I mean, talk about somebody that understands the real nature of his job. It's Pat. And he and I were famous friends and still are. And you're right, he was the glue, and Tommy came back to the band. Let me say this about Tommy. Have you seen him? He's like a freak of nature. He looks like he's 28 years old. It's like, I mean, I have a certain amount of pride in my appearance. You'd never know it to look at me in this setting today, but
you look great. What are you talking about? You look great. God.
He goes way past the criteria of expectation. And he sings great. And come on, let's face it. I mean, Tommy Johnston was the voice of that group with Pat, but Tommy was the guy in a lot of ways. And it was so good when he came back to the band. Now they're touring with Michael and Tommy, you know, and Pat. I love the band with Michael in it, you know. My only complaint with that band was Jeff Baxter sitting on a stool to play guitar. I always thought that was pretentious and a total load of crap. But other than that, you know.
Jeff's an interesting guy to talk to. I talked to him twice. He's an interesting man. He's coming at the pie from an angle that I don't live in, and that's always interesting. Did American Roadhouse ever happen? Did that TV show did that come to fruition?
No, it never got. We never found a home for it.
Because that sounded like such a great idea.
It's a great idea, but sometimes, you know, and there again, I haven't given up on the American Roadhouse. I think we'll find a place for it. We just haven't found the place. You know, it's a little smarter than shooting alligators in a boat. You know, it's not quite down on that knuckle dragging level of entertainment, but to me, it's a what is that? Educational television, PBS.
Oh yeah.
To me, it's a PBS show. You know, with Bob Seger as a guest, or you know,
how about Bob Dylan? I know you go back and love him from way back when. God,
I you know, Gordon Lightfoot just died, who was another huge musical pillar of influence and affection for me as a kid. And I was really endeared to Bob because Bob came out and really laid it on and put it where it belonged. You know, Bob was that sneering, snotty little rock and roll folk singer, but Gordon Lightfoot was this elegant, really beautiful voiced, you know, everybody wanted to be Gordon. If you wanted to be Bob, you had to be a little darker, you know, in the persona. But man, Gordon Lightfoot was like handsome, beautiful, great player, wrote great. He's everything you wanted to be.
Yeah, 12-string guitarist, you know, there you go.
Good guitarist. I met Gordon in Nashville. he was mixing a record in the studio, and he was upstairs in the mix room above me where I was recording. And I actually got to go up, knocked on the door, came in. Yes, my name's Henry. I'm downstairs recording with a group called Black Hawk, and I'm a fan of Gordon Lightfoot's, and I wonder if I could get, a moment just to say hello. And Gordon came to the door, invited me in, signed a record of mine, and anointed me with the high honor of rock and roll and folk music excellence, and it was a 10-minute part of my life that ranks up there with going to see the Beatles at Shea Stadium. It was just a very big moment, and so I love it.
You saw the Beatles at Shea Stadium. Oh my God. Iconic concerts. Talk about an iconic.
Yeah, their first trip to Shea, I was in the audience trying to hear.
Yeah.
Trying to get my $5 worth, but they didn't play that long. They played for maybe 30 minutes. But it was a really impressionistic 30 minutes, half hour.
Henry Paul, what about you?
That's a good question. I would probably have to say, and I'm fishing while I'm thinking here, it would have to be it happened not long ago, and it's happened twice in my life. You're up there cruising along through the show, and the lights go out. Oh, we got a technical problem. We're playing in the dark. Play along. The lights don't come back on. Next thing you know, the PA goes out. Now you're standing in front of 3,000 or 4,000 people, and there's no lights and no sound. So I said to the band, grab your acoustic guitars. We're going out into the audience. We're going to go out into the audience, and this would be Dave and Randy and I in Black Hawk, and we're going to stand in the middle of the audience. We're going to gather everybody around us, and we're going to sing, no mics, and we're going to sing our songs, the remainder of the show, acoustically. It's one of the greatest things and one of the craziest things that you can do. You come off that stage, you walk out into the audience, everybody's like, woo, 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 woo. And you tell them, circle around. We're not using any microphones. We're going to do the rest of the show out here in the audience with you guys. And you launch right on into the song, next song on the set list. And you go right through the list, and you play it all, and you sing it all. And the people are about to explode with enthusiasm. Here are these people they love, and they came to see and paid money to have a ticket, standing literally 2 feet from them, singing at the top of their lungs with no microphone. And the PA comes back on, the lights come on, and they say, okay, we can go back up now. And I said, no, we're not going back up. We're going to stay here. We're going to finish the night here. Oh, everybody applauds. It's like, you have them. You have them. They have you. You have one another in this setting. And it transcends that big lit production stage with the PA. So that would be, it's one of the great moments. And it happened like literally a week or 10 days ago. And I forget where we were, but it happens. It's happened once in Kansas City, and it happened the other night in Casper, Wyoming. And you come off the stage, you go out into the audience, you have everybody circle around, you do your show, you pose for pictures, you shake hands, you give them a hug. Maybe you get COVID, who the hell knows, but it's a great night. It takes a really good night and turns it into this absolutely unforgettable experience.
What do you think is the best album you ever made, and what was the hardest album you ever made?
The first record that you make in any band is generally your best. The first Outlaws album, the first Henry Paul band record, the first Black Hawk record. Those 3 records are the best records I've ever made. I owe a lot of that to Paul Rothchild, who produced the first record on the Outlaws. I owe a lot of that to Ron and Howard Albert and Don Gaiman, who produced and engineered the first Henry Paul band record. And by the time I got to Nashville and made the first Black Hawk record, Van Stevenson was a very accomplished producer, and we had the head of the label, Tim Dubois, as a co-producer on the project. There was no way it was going to sound like Poopy Caca. But those three records are the best I ever made. And if you just held up three records and say, that's my life, I'd be okay with that.
Hardest record?
I would say the second Henry Paul Band record was really difficult.
Why?
It was my first attempt to produce myself. I wasn't near ready. And Joe Lala from Blues Image, who played percussion with the Bee Gees and with Stephen Stills and Crosby, Stills, Nash, he was living in Miami at the time, and Joe played on every record I made. And he said, Henry, I love you, but this record is lacking dynamic range. There's no real lows, there's no real highs, there's a lot of mids. And he was right. There's some great songs on the record. And I would say you could say it was a respectable first production as a producer, but that was the most difficult record I ever made as a producer. I was like,
You'd mentioned things like The Boys of Summer, and that's certainly one of mine, but
Sunset Grill by Don Henley. I wish I had written that. Subterranean Homesick Blues. I wish I had written that. And maybe Bluebird by Stephen Stills. I certainly wish I had written that.
Three proudest moments of your songwriting. What are the three songs you're the most proud of?
Well, I would say Let 'Em Whirl by Black Hawk. Gray Ghost, definitely by the Henry Paul Band. And Song of the Breeze, I think, stands right there with those.
You mentioned the Gordon Lightfoot thing. Are there other times where, I mean, it was a moment in time where you met someone because, man, you were backstage for the right reasons because you were playing, but are other moments like the Gordon Lightfoot moment?
Recording Hurry Sundown with Bill Simzik, who was like the president of the men's club. He was the greatest man's man you've ever been in a room with. And he was very generous, always buying dinner, always buying blow, always the foot throwing. He had tons of money.
So Bill Simzik was a man's man.
Man, the biggest guy and the most generous and most interesting and just warm and inviting guy I've ever met. Just incredible guy. We would be in the studio at one point during the day. The Eagles would be in later that day. He'd be, making an Eagles record and an Outlaws record at the same time. There was a bar next door where we would all go over, and you'd sit in a booth with Glenn Fry.
Did you get to know Randy? I interviewed Randy. It's probably the longest interview with Randy on the internet. Did you get to know Randy?
I didn't. He was out of the band pretty early. Randy opened a show for Black Hawk in St. George, Utah. This would be 1995. I mean, it's all in there. It's crazy. I got a chance that night to spend some time with Randy Meisner. His band went up and did a very, very good show. They were just musically impeccable and great voice and just a very admirable musical impression. And being the original bassist in Poco and the Eagles, he was like an enormously large and important person in my life, musically, professionally. And so that, was still at a time where he was very healthy and functional and lucid and together and really had his act in order. And so that was exciting.
Yeah, I liked Randy. He was, in the middle of the interview, there's a deer. He was living in the Hollywood Hills at the time, and there was there's a deer that goes by. He says, "Can you hold on? I was watching this deer in my backyard." We stopped the interview. It was the coolest moment.
And those people, and that's a very broad generalization, and I don't mean to sound very generalized, but people with careers that mirror Randy Meisner's, they are eclectic and very unusual people. They're not like everyday people. They're very different. And I think that you would agree with me that, the guitar player from the Eagles, Bernie Ledden, was a very eclectic and different kind of character. And these are people that kind of grew up in the rock bars in Florida, just like the Outlaws. Bernie was from Gainesville, Tom Petty and Mudcrutch, and we would play in rooms simultaneously with these bands. And the Allman Brothers, all of the early incarnations of that group were always around, and you always knew of them. And it was the music scene down there was really huge and very, very competitive and very played out at a high level. So, you know, people like Bernie, they're very, and I don't know, there's so many levels to those people.
Yeah.
I see the guitar player for the Eagles, what's his name that left?
Don Felder.
Don Felder. Woo! Really handsome, California.
He looked like a movie star, Don Felder.
Movie star. And he dresses so nice, and he's so suave and so gifted, and just I remember in the Eagles, and you saw that famous video where he's wearing the plaid shirt and the blue suspenders, and he's playing the double neck guitar, and his hair is perfect, and his beard, he looks like one of the Bee Gees, for God's sake. Just like, I want to be him.
Yeah.
I'll be that guy. Can I be him, please?
Yeah. Don Henley, any
he distinguishes himself in every category for me. There's nothing he's ever done that I don't love. I mean, and you can say he's cranky and he's, whatever, maybe less than appealing as a person from the standpoint of his social profile, but screw that. He is, I would say, a top 5 member of the American singer-songwriter community. And he resides there along with Bob Dylan.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think if you're me, I don't look at my life and find a whole lot of things to celebrate with regard to what it represents. But I do have something to show for it. And it's not money, because I'm not rich like I know some people are. I'm not that. It's not fame, because I can walk into any grocery store in the United States and spend 45 minutes and never be bothered by anybody. But I do have something to show for my life, something tangible to show for my effort. Some people, I don't care if you're a doctor or a lawyer, you have a life of productivity and of commitment and integrity, but I actually have something to show for it. And that's the gift that I was given, is the Outlaws self-titled album, Black Hawk self-titled album, the Grey Ghost album. I mean, I have those things that are products of my effort and directly reflect my commitment to music in my life. And so I have that.
But the Black Hawk album, I mean, speaking of looking like movie stars, you can look at the cover of that tall guy there that I'm talking to. You didn't get fans and come up to you in Kroger's then? I mean,
yeah. Oh yeah. When you're on TV a lot, you get that, but I haven't been on TV in a long time, and my hair was brown and curly, and it's still curly and it's silver now. But I mean, none of that ever meant anything to me. What mattered most was just respect for my peer group.
Yeah.
I wanted people to respect my effort.
Hey man, I've thoroughly, and I don't say this too much in the interviews, not that I don't enjoy what I do. I love what I do, but you are truly an inspiration. I mean, I can't thank you enough for spending time. This has been, this is a different one for me. I really appreciate you a lot.
Well, good. Well, it was fun to talk to you, and I appreciate you finding interest in me enough to want to do that. It makes me feel it's very gratifying, and I appreciate it.
It's all good. Anyway, thank you, and take care of yourself, man.
I will. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye.